what I figured out in my career of being an experienced designer is that systems design is actually systems, or experience design is actually systems engineering, and systems engineering is actually experience design. And because I know in Women Who Code, we have a lot of engineers, I wanted to address this idea that I've run into quite a bit of how design and engineering fit together. So there's usually a bit of a debate, and sometimes internally there's a little bit of conflict in organizations about whether something is design or whether it's engineering. And a lot of times I think that the things that we work on are both. And I don't see from my experience in my career that I think that there isn't a clear categorization in a lot of it, especially up front when you're defining things, because engineers are also designing experiences and designers are also engineering. So there's kind of a balance there. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that I think that as humans, I talk about humans a lot too, so I'll probably talk about that kind of stuff. But as humans, we have this, the way our brains work is that we have this need to categorize things, and it developed as an evolutionary skill in order to help us survive. So like when we were, you know, roaming the tundra, if you saw a lion, you had to look at it and say, oh my God, there's a lion, what do I do? And then your brain had to notice what it is, make an assessment, make a reaction, and then tell your body to do something, right? Run or hide or prepare to defend yourself or whatever it is. So I think that we do that a lot in everyday life, and I think it affects how our systems operate. And I think it, in a very real sense for the people on this call, I think it affects us as designers and engineers. So what I did is I kind of try to think of how I approach things, and when you're doing things in a system, that you're approaching them from those two perspectives. And when you look at the definition of design and engineering, they're actually quite similar. So these are the two definitions of a system from the dictionary. So a system is a set of things that are working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnecting network, or it's a set of principles or procedures according to which something is done, an organized scheme or a method. So what I think is really important about these definitions is the words things working together, interconnected network, and then principles or procedures, and then organized. So those are like the key concepts that make up a system. And then everything, I think, I tried really hard to think of something that's not part of a system. I mean, there literally isn't. There's nothing in that exists that isn't part of a system. So these are just some examples of systems that exist that we're familiar with. So the human body is a system, society and government. And like right now in what's happening, we're seeing some things that we're seeing some push-pull on the system right now in society and government, because we've all shifted a bunch of things based on something that's happened. So there's been an action that's caused a reaction in the system. And then machines, the earth, family, networks, language, companies, and schools. So all those things are all systems, and most of them are part of what we would, part of our existence as a general overall or overarching system. So the idea is that systems are made up of parts, and then the parts can be subsystems, and then all of those things work together to generate an outcome, right? So, and then the outcome influences the system. So basically, when, as a system is set up, if you've engineered a system, whether it's software or, you know, how something, maybe a process in your organization or your team, those things are systematically set up in a way that there's other systems affecting those, and they're all generating outcomes, which then loop back in to affect how the overall system operates. So I think that when you're designing a system, I think that it's really important to think from a big picture view. So what I mean is that a lot of times we tend to focus in on areas that we're working or specific things, which is good, but a lot of times there are influences and impacts that are happening that are affecting what we're seeing as the outcomes or the results or the influences that we're defining. And I think that it's really difficult to assess a system when you're part of the system, but most of the time we are, right? So if well, I'll give you an example. So in my career, I have many times been hired to come into an organization and to set up design or bring design in as a discipline into that organization. And what I've learned is that most of the time when I've come in, or many times when I've come in, I've looked at it and said, okay, well, we're missing this, 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 and this, right? We need to start doing this. We need to start doing this. We need to set up this. But sometimes I didn't see myself as the participant of how I'm influenced the system that already existed, right? So let's say I come in from a human standpoint and I say, okay, we're going to start using design in this organization, and I set up a bunch of processes or procedures, or I just start designing. Those are influencing how things were already operating. So you have to see how you fit into that system and assess things based on your role in it and also what you want the outcome to be. So the idea is that in system design, the process of designing the system is actually part of the resulting system. So whatever's happening, I'm a really big believer that internal processes, internal experiences result, good internal experiences result in good external experiences. So whatever's happening internally in your brain or internally in an organization, those things are going to result in, going to affect the outcome. And I think we see that all the time. So like if you're feeling, from a just raw human perspective, if you're feeling good, you're likely to produce a better software, right? Or if you're feeling like you're having a good day, or you're eating healthy, you're likely to operate better, right? Or if it's anything simplistic like a car, if you put good high quality fuel in a car, it functions better. Okay, so this is really cool, actually. So I system design leverages first, second, and even third order thinking. So what that means is that whatever you do or whatever's happening, whatever you define from a software or technology perspective or an organizational perspective or a user experience perspective, everything that happens has an effect, has a consequence, right? So the initial consequence is the first order, and then the consequences of the consequences is the second order, and then it goes on and on. And I'm gonna talk about an example that my daughter actually shares with me, and she was telling me the story about in Yellowstone Park. So there was a time where they didn't have a very significant wolf population, and what they did was they had to, because the wolf population had gone down quite a bit, they had to reintroduce them. And what they saw when they did that is, as they reintroduced the wolf population, the elk population went down because there were, predator and prey. And then when the elk population went down, the elk would spend less time along the rivers eating, and so the foliage along the rivers increased. And then when the foliage along the rivers increased, the beaver population increased. And because the beaver population increased, the dams, the number of dams in the rivers increased. And because the number of dams in the rivers increased, the actual quality of the water improved. And because the quality of the water improved, the fish came, the population of fish increased. So that's an example of, I guess, maybe even like fifth, sixth order thinking or something, because that's a ecosystem that was affected by a small thing, and they didn't even expect any of this to happen, but they saw results just by something, you know. I don't think anybody would have looked at it and said originally, oh, we're going to reintroduce wolves. I bet the rivers are going to improve, right? I bet we're going to see more fish. So I think it's a really powerful thing to look at things that way. And I think we're seeing it now today with, you know, kind of how we've all, you know, gone into this self-isolation and, you know, stay at home. And the earth is regenerating a little bit in some areas because of it. The pollution's going down and water quality is improving. So it's really important, I think, when you design systems to think about this. So the idea of making space, this is something that I recently learned from the guy that is this founder of Aventurine. Actually, it's his term. And what this means is that if you're designing a system, a lot of times when I design or when I envision how something works, I think about the definition and that I have to be very prescribed about, you know, how detailed about how everything works. But what I realized over time is that there's instances where you have to make space for learnings. So especially when it involves humans. So you might come up with an idea of how something should work, but you need to give that an opportunity to happen and let others influence it, and make space for the influence of others coming in and the influence of reactions and consequences, so you understand how the system works. And this, I honestly think that just being able to put a label on this concept has made me exponentially better in what I do, because I've been able to kind of sit back and say, oh, this is the goal that I think needs to happen. This is how I've defined it. And then I say, okay, let's see what's happening, and watch and let other people or events influence it. And then it lets me make kind of an assessment of, and it lets it grow in a way that's very powerful, and everyone's invested. Okay, so I wanted to talk about human-centered design. So in my field, there's a lot of talk about design being human-centered, and I am a big proponent of that. And until actually we went into this isolation, I would have said that that's the most important thing. But I think that society's shifting, and I think that we as humans need to shift a little bit and start thinking about things, how we fit in a little bit differently. So maybe design and engineering should be centered around evaluating nature and the earth, and then humans and machines all on an equal footing. So it's not just human centered, or, you know, that's not just our goal. Our goal is to optimize things so that machines work effectively, humans work effectively, the earth, it works effectively. So all those things are in balance in creating a good system. Okay, so does anybody have any questions or comments they want to say? Because I'm going to talk about something else, and I'm going to talk about some tools.
And I can vouch for Becky. She's really into questions. I remember I first met her at a KIFO event. So don't be afraid, and go ahead and just kind of, I know it's kind of hard to think of a question on the spot, but if you enter your question in the chat, if she keeps on going here and then you think of a question, you can enter it in the chat. And then while she's talking, I'll make sure and monitor both so that we can make sure and get to those, because like Becky said earlier, that can lead to some really interesting discussion for everybody.
Yeah. I really, yeah, if you,
go ahead. Becky, did you have a comment there?
Oh, I thought somebody was going to say something. Somebody else was going to say something. No, I was gonna say that it's really cool, like this format now, because it's a really nice way to have a conversation. So if we want to kind of talk about any of these topics, I think it would be a really interesting discussion to hear what people think.
I see
Hi,
Aaron.
Becky. It's Erin.
Hey, Erin.
Hey.
Erin.
What's up, girl? I absolutely love what you're saying about human-centered design and shifting to focus on how we fit into the system around us. I think that's so poignant and relevant to what we're all collectively going through. I absolutely love examples of biomimicry where we design systems and engineer systems based on things around us in nature. I know that we've talked about this before. What are some of your favorite examples of things like that?
Oh my gosh.
I know. Just nerd out about
Actually, there was one recently. There was a company. Actually, so I didn't talk about this really, but in my job, so what I do for a living at a venturing, like I have my own design studio where I do, mostly on my design studio, I do good projects, like if people who need help, like, and are doing good things in the world. Like I try really hard to help people with design. But in my other job, we work with scientists and inventors, and we help them take their research and bring it into the world to make impact. So like translating it out of academic world and into impact into the real world. But real world, I guess. But there was one recently where this company had built a filtration system based on shark gills. Like they had analyzed how the filtration system works on sharks, and they had designed a non, my mind's blanking the term, but they had designed a synthetic version basically of that. So that was pretty interesting.
There's one,
yeah,
if I could add something there too. So fun fact, one of our upcoming speakers, if she's still, crossing our fingers, if she's still going to speak for us in a few months, her name's Denise. I'm forgetting her last name, but she used to teach in Montana at a college on biomimicry. And then she's going to be moving to the Portland area, I think this month or next. And she was going to present for Design Portland. She gave Trisha and I free access to her biomimicry course, which then taught me that there are some scientists and engineers that are looking into like butterfly wings, specifically the blue, I think it's morpho butterfly, the way that their scales, it's something to do with the way it refracts light, that their wings aren't actually blue, but something in the process of like the light coming in and then going back out, it converts it to blue so that we, obviously receive the light and then perceive it as blue. But that has inspired more sustainable paint products because it doesn't actually have to be pigmented as blue, but I need to get more details on that clearly, but
that's
just
cool.
Tying all that together of like letting nature inspire, circular regenerative products that factor into this whole big conversation about making us not as much of a pollutant on the earth as we are currently.
Making us fit into the system.
yes, exactly. There you go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's awesome. Did you have one, Erin? Did you have one you wanted to mention?
I didn't. This is from a long time back, but the only one that I can think of is kelp. They looked at the way that kelp moves on the bottom of the sea floor, and to generate electricity, they anchored an instrument down there to wave back and forth with the undertow, the current, and it generated electricity and sent it up to the surface. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
But, dude, that shark gill thing is like freaking legit. It sounds awesome.
Yeah, I love so that cool. Kind of stuff. Yeah, it's fascinating. And you know what, actually, that's part of the philosophy of Aventurine. Like one of the things that the founder talks about a lot is looking to nature for inspiration of how to, what we should be doing, and ideas for how things should work, I mean, clearly, the Earth has had a lot of prototyping period. It's been millions of years in trial, so
Just a little.
seems to be working out. So yeah, probably the Earth knows what it's doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anybody else have a comment or question?
I see secondary consequences from Amy. She says, your example of secondary consequences reminded me of when you give a mouse a cookie. That's so funny. I totally did not think of that, but it totally makes sense. Are you familiar with that book, Becky?
No.
No, okay. So if I can try and paraphrase my best. It's a children's book where you start out the book where it's this cute little mouse in overalls, and so when you give a mouse a cookie, he'll take it and he'll think he needs a cup of milk or something, and he'll go on this crazy long adventure of consequences, where when you start this series of events with a cookie, you end up from A to Z.
Yeah, that is similar. That's cool. I'll have to look it up. That also
teach some kids about second order thinking.
Yeah, that would be great. That sounds like it's awesome. It also reminds me of this song my mom used to sing to me when I was a kid called There's a Hole in My Bucket. Did you guys ever hear that song?
No, I haven't. What's that one?
Oh man, it goes on forever, but it starts off with "There's a hole in my bucket." It's a guy and his partner singing. The guy's like, "There's a hole in my bucket," and she's like, "Well, fix it." And he's like, "Well, what should I use to fix it?" And she's like, "With a stick." And he's like, "Well, how should I cut the stick?" And she's like, "With an axe." And he's like, "Well, my axe is too dull." And she's like, "Well, sharpen it." And it's like this whole thing that goes on and on and on. It's like, and then it comes back to where he actually needs water, and she's like, "Well, go get some water." And he's like, "Well, there's a hole in my bucket."
Oh, yeah, it's very similar. Totally.
Yeah.
Like
so it's like everything's connected, And I think that one, I should have said at the beginning, and I would like to say it now before I get into this, but I hope everyone's okay. This is definitely not an okay time, and there's I'm sure that everyone out there is going through something. I don't know how you couldn't be, but it's an interesting time to look at systems, like how you operate in your house, and how you affect things around you. And just, there's so many little things happening right now that are like, oh my gosh, that's a shift in the system, So
yeah,
it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's related to what you said, I think, about taking your internal system and how you're feeling and how that can come out in your work, and then also working from home and seeing, oh, my dishes are in the sink. They're not, because I used my lunch break today to do dishes, but like just things like that. Like I feel better because I'm seeing, like, normally when I would come home, I would see my dishes and I'm like, oh, I was just at the office all day, I don't really feel like doing them. But like now I feel like my internal zone is much better because I'm fixing my system of like just my daily habits, my environment. So
yeah, and I
cool.
think that's one way. Like if you're feeling down and like frustrated or discouraged or sad or stressed or anything like that, a really good way to look at things is that systematically. So like figure out something you can inject into the system that's happening to shift how you feel, or maybe maybe trying to shift how you feel can affect how you continue to feel or operate or something like that. Like I live in a very tiny house because I prefer tiny living, but like I can see my bed right now, and if I don't make my bed, I feel like the whole day I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, like stressing me out. So yeah, it's definitely an important thing to do right now. Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit to show you some things and talk through. So the next bit of the presentation is about tools. And I just want to reiterate that I'm going to show some things that are things that I've done and some aren't things that I've done. They're things that I collected. And most of it is in kind of like a haphazard state. So it's not, I'm not going to show you like a lot of perfect examples of finished work or anything, but I want you to just see like the stuff that's happening in the system's creation, You know, I spend a lot of time in my career feeling frustrated because things aren't perfect, because I have this OCD voice inside of me that's always like, oh my gosh, it's not good enough, you know? So, but you know what, that just doesn't exist. Like perfection is a unattainable goal. So in one of my most recent positions at RealWear, I helped lead the design of a design system. So a design system is basically like if you're going to build an operating system, like if you're going to build Android or iOS or something like that, you have to systematically define it. So like in Android, there's a system called material design, and that's the system of the design system for Android. And it gives you like all the icons and all the interactions and all the user patterns and like all the stuff that makes Android what it is, and gives you the tools as an engineer to go off and build something with all that stuff designed for you. So I was helping to design that type of thing for an augmented reality headset. And the headset itself was based on material design. So because it was based on material design, or the headset itself was based on Android, so my strategy in doing it was to base it on material design for a number of reasons. One being that there are millions of people who use Android, so they would be familiar with it. Two being that Google spent lots and lots of money and time and resources building material design. So whatever we could use, that was of value to us. And as a startup, you know, you're trying to save resources and things like that. So basically what I did was, in just an Excel spreadsheet, I went through our operating system that we had in existence at the time I joined and documented all of the parts, right? So like, what are the things that we have in our system that, and then I went to material design and I said, okay, so does material design have this? And if it does, how does it work? And then is it make sense that we use how it works in material design and directly try to translate into how it should work in this augmented reality headset? So this is a list of the things that are that were in the AR headset. And then this is the name of the operating system, was called Wear HF. So these are all the things that are in there. And then these are if it exists in material design. So yes, no. And then from there, I went in and did like the design team and the engineering team went in and did design concepts based on, okay, let's talk about, there's a status bar. We have a status bar in our design. Well, material design has a status bar, right? How does their status bar work? Well, it works like this. Does that make sense in augmented reality? Well, yes and no. Some of it does, some of it doesn't. So we took what they had and then analyzed it for our UX and then optimized it for that, so that we could build something that works systematically from a base system that already exists. It's kind of like biomimicry, right? Like something that already exists, taking it, looking at it, and then implementing it, learning from it and implementing what you've learned. So that's what that is. And you can also interrupt me here and ask me questions about this stuff, because I'm going to just skip around and I can come back to whatever as well. So the next thing is mind maps, concept maps, and system maps. So, okay, this is where my startup-iness kind of comes into play. There's a lot of people in my field, UX, spend a lot of time arguing over definitions of what things are. And it's very frustrating sometimes, because I find that a lot of the labels that we say, oh no, that's a this or that's a that, are like, well, actually, I think that's fits in the other category, you know? So I think that it's flexible. A lot of people don't, and they would get very upset if I said, oh, that's a mind map, but it's actually a concept map. But I don't feel that way personally. So, and I actually haven't felt that way. Like I would have felt that way in my past, but I don't feel that way anymore. So I'm going to show you some example of mind, concept, and system maps. So this is one that I did about humans when I was thinking about, I'm working on a book and it's going very slowly, but the book is about, it's called Humans, a User Manual. And I'm trying to like think about how humans operate within the world and the different things that affect them. So in a mind map, or you might call this a concept map, what I did was I just started with humans, and then I started writing out things that are important. So like nature's important, machines are important, cognitive biases are important, the process, you know, and then you just keep adding stuff on from there, and then you start to connect things, right? So I thought, oh man, so like somebody's cognitive bias is actually affected by their physiology, right? And physiology is connected to nature, right? So you just kind of, it just helps you kind of figure out how get everything out. It's just the point is to get everything out and kind of start to see how it fits together. So that's what this one was about, kind of a little bit about, I got stuck where I was working on my book. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to make a mind map and try to go from there. And then this one, this is a lot of people would call this an affinity diagram, I think, or something else. But this was basically at RealWear, I sat down with the CEO and kind of interviewed him. And we just threw a bunch of ideas up. And what we got to was some stakeholders and influencers, and then what things meant, and like words and terms. And like all of this can be anything. So I just literally, you just start writing things down, and then you start making labels. Like at the beginning, we didn't have these labels. We were just like, let's start talking about our product. Let's start talking about the company. Let's start talking about what's happening in society. And then these labels started to come about. So there's not really any like perfect way to do this. It's kind of at your own discretion.
Can I ask a question there, Becky?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if I'm readjusting a little bit here.
Sorry.
How do you get your stakeholders to sit down and talk to each other? Because I've had an issue in the past where certain clients like don't want to slow down and talk about things. Like they think they have it all figured out. They think they have an understanding of their workflows. But you need to like as the designer or the you know B2B business, you need to figure out how to convey the value of like kind of slowing down and having this conversation. How have you approached that before?
That is a massive battle. I
Can of worms question.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, like I said, a lot of my experience has been in startups and integrating design. So a lot of times, the places I would come in, they were super resistant to that, and it leads to a lot of friction. But I think brainstorming sessions are one of the most powerful ways to do it. Like if you can get people to actually participate in one and listen to them, and not necessarily run it, but just facilitate it. So we just did one last week about a topic, and it was focused on a specific type of group we're targeting. And we did it remotely, and I don't really say anything really, unless it's like, well, tell me a little bit more about that, or you know, and I just like instantly, I just start jotting down things people say. And I think when people start seeing that happening, then they're like, they start feeling good about it, right? Because they're like, oh, somebody's listening to me, and this is actually important, right? And they start, and if you start to like in front of them, they watch it start to evolve into categories and things like that. That I think that's the most powerful way to do it. If you can just get that initial, like, hey, you know what? I really would love it if we could just kind of sit down and talk about this, and let me collect everybody's brain, you know? I think that's good. But I think one of the most important things in that, trying to get to a part where people make time, is the making space concept. Because I've gone into a lot of organizations and I'm like, no, we have to do it this way. This is better way. I know it's the better way. And we're going to regret it later if we do not do this. right?
Mhm.
And it never works. They're always like, oh, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then later you're like, yeah, well, see, that didn't really work out so well, did it? But I think that,
we have someone in the comments too that wants to
okay.
jump in after you make your comment, maybe.
Okay, but I think that then when I've learned to make space and be like, no, all right, let's try it your way, let's see what happens. And then, kind of just start to try to guide it a little bit. Or sometimes I'll just go off and start start collecting things on Post-its without even, while they're talking to me about something else, just so they see it start happening, even though
Yeah.
they didn't know I was going to do it. Just start doing it. And then they're like, oh my gosh, she's writing all this down. She's like making stuff, Then they're like, oh, okay, let's keep doing that,
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I love that.
What was the question?
Was it Shiwan?
Hi, this is Shian. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I think I wanted to jump in on answering this question, and I think how I approach it depends on how smart I feel like everybody involved is. Like if people are, if they're like good clients or they're super they get it, then I think it can help quite a bit to give some context or frame the conversation a little bit and let them know what work this piece of information is feeding. Like, I need to get a specific piece of information from you, and the reason I need it is because this work is about to feed this other piece of work. Like, contextualize what you need to get answered from them. If they're not smart and if they're dumb, then and they don't and they don't understand the concept of a dependency. If you're like, this is a dependency, and they're like, what? Then sometimes I just say designery words like workshop and brainstorm and concepting, and then just throw questions at them until someone gives an answer. And then they're impressed by the designery words, and then they just start talking. But I think that's not a great scenario, because then they're not really thought partners. They're just you're babysitting.
Thought partners is interesting. What do you think of that?
Thought partners is an interesting word. Yeah, I think that's true. I think also I use the kind of, I call them experience discovery sessions. And I think it's really important that one of the things that's really important is to show, like you were talking about dependencies, is to show results, So a lot of times, when I have them internally with teams that I work with, I'll do it, we'll talk about it, I'll listen to them, and then I'll very quickly, within a day or so, send them the overall, hey, this is what we all figured out, and here it is all organized and categorized. This is all your brains kind of mapped, and now we're going to use this to do X, right? And it's worked so far for me in a lot of instances. And now people in my organization, people are starting to go back to them and reference them, right? So we've been using Mural since we're remote now. So people are like, hey, where's that mural that we did, so I can see,
Oh, mural. That's a cool word, because you think of it being a vast thing in front of you. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. That was a good comment.
Note there. Yeah. Definitely looking to gather a variety of perspectives here. So I think maybe too, Becky, like you said, you focus on results sometimes. So maybe do you bring up old concept maps that you're able to share from past projects and say by the way, this is what's going to happen. We're going to make this, and then this is what it turns into. So you can kind of show.
I haven't done that a lot, because most of the time, like I said, the companies that I work in or have worked in the past, if I showed them something like that, they wouldn't know what it was. So they have to see it kind of happen. Because if I say, oh, look, here, let me show you an example of one, they'd be like,
what?
Yeah, great. I have no idea what that is. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, even if you explain it to them, they're still kind of like, I don't really know, you know. Anyway, so, but they can be like, here's one that's like kind of cute and cool with little cartoons and things, right? So it's a map of the human nervous system and how the human biology works. So they can be kind of interesting, and I think they tell stories, you know, and I think that they can be powerful to communicate and get people to talk. And then this is like one that I did about this talk when I was trying to think about what I was going to talk about. So I was like, oh, well, okay, let's say I'm talking about system design. What things do I think are important? I think process is important, language, purpose, influencers, stakeholders, components. And then I started thinking from there, like what other things influence that. And then I'm going to move on to the next thing. Mental and concept models. So I love this quote from Albert Einstein. It says, to break a mental model is harder than splitting an atom. And you know what, this is so true. And actually part of the problem, I think, with getting people to use design tools or these kind of interaction tools that we're talking about is because of their mental model of how they think things work, right? So I have worked with a number of people who were had experiences where, let's say you're designing a product. Well, in the past, if you were designing a product, I would go write like a 20-page functional spec, right? That's how we would start, you know? So go write the specification, and then we'll use that. And trying to get those people to be like, no, we don't actually have to do all that first. We can just kind of map it out and get everybody going and on the same page. And kind of, it's like agile design rather than waterfall. You know, it's like if you think of waterfall development and agile development, if you think of actually product design in that same context, you don't have to like, oh, okay, I'm producing a 20-page document, it'll be ready in a month, and then we're going to build software from that, right? You can say, oh no, let's actually start to just figure some stuff out, right? And together. And I think it works really well to kind of bring people together. So I put a bunch of, this is my favorite cartoon ever, so I had to show this one. It's very tiny, so I hope you can see it. This is a Far Side cartoon, and it's it's this kid like pushing on a pull door, and I think this is hysterical. I've done this so many times, right? And the reason I wanted to show this is because people's mental models don't always make sense, right? So if my brain lets me walk up to a door that says pull very clearly on it and has a handle that looks like I'm supposed to pull it, and I still try to push it, then, you know, there's stuff going on up here that's like not quite clicking, right? So when you're working with people, you have to be patient with them, because, you know, it might not be that they're hard to deal with or something. It might be that their brain is just not seeing it, right? And they don't get it, right? So their brain's analyzing something in a completely different way, so it doesn't make any sense to them. So you have to figure out what's happening up here and then adjust it that way. So I really like this example. It also, I don't know if you guys know, but there's a famous design thinking guru called Don Norman, and he wrote a book called The Design of Everyday Things, and he has a concept called Norman doors, and it's basically all the doors in society that have been designed that don't work like they look like they should work, right? So like they slide, but they look like you should push them, and it's the opening of his book, he talks about this getting trapped between two sets of glass doors in a building, trying to figure out like how to get out. So anyway, the idea though is like when you're designing a system, you have to take into account that people's brains are differently and they might not catch on, right? So if they don't understand, like earlier we're saying, if they don't understand, it might be they don't understand, you know? So
And
it's
something too that I've noticed on a day-to-day basis, that if you're kind of maybe having trouble relating to that concept, I mean, we've all pushed a pull door, but I just heard, like, for example, my boss today, we were pair programming, and he said he kind of made a silly mistake, and he was like, "Oh, you dummy," like talking to himself. Because it's like your other brain is your brain's going the other way, and like you meant to go here, and then you see your own mistake that you made, and you're like, why did I do that? It's just,
I know, yeah. And it's also like, it's really actually revealing about us, because it's instinctual, things are happening. And then later we're like, why did that just happen? So, you know, I think when you're in design, I think as a designer, I get frustrated. I have in the past got quite frustrated when people don't understand what I'm trying to communicate or what I'm trying to accomplish. But, you know, when I know that I do this, I think, well, you know, sometimes you push on a pull door, you know, so gotta be patient with people. Let's see what else I got. This one's kind of funny. So I posted this on LinkedIn not very long ago. So this is about digital transformation, and it's I'll just read through it real quick. So there's a guy presenting on a video call, and he's like, "You ready to talk about digital transformation?" And they say, "We can't see your slides." And he said, do you need to download the video plugin? And they said, well, we're restricted to IE7. Clearly this is old, but he says, okay, I'll try emailing the slide deck, but it bounced back. And then they say, well, our file limit is 1 megabyte. And then he's like, is Dropbox or WeTransfer work? Nope, blocked by our firewall. Google Docs? Yeah, right. And he's like, I'm not sure how to present it to you. And they're like, can we fax it to us? So there's like a bunch of mental models going on right now. And this is actually happening to us now. Like every meeting, I think every remote meeting is a little bit of trying to figure it out. Like, I can't hear you, you know, I have to check my preferences and make sure my audio is coming out my headphones, and like all kinds of stuff like that. So I think it's just an interesting thing to think about what's happening there, and like the struggles people are going through up here to figure it out, right? And how to kind of be patient with that. Okay, so empathy maps. This is actually, you'll like this, Kaylin, because this is kind of goes back to what you were saying about how do you get people to kind of take time for this. But this is an empathy map about empathy maps. So it's basically like all of the things about empathy maps and how you create them in a empathy map. So if you don't know what an empathy map is, it's basically the core of it is kind of documenting this bit right here. So how people think and feel, what they're hearing, what they're saying and doing, and what they're seeing. So it's like if you take a user, like if we were designing Zoom or something, then we would want to say, oh, what is a Zoom user thinking and feeling? Well, they're probably thinking, you know, it's really frustrating that I can't hear people, or, you know, my audio's cutting out, or whatever. Or what are they hearing from other people about Zoom, or what are they saying and doing? And then this one's nice because it has a part that's called pains and gains. So it gives you an idea of like the gains are like what the user wants to get out of it, and the pains are like the frustrations that they're feeling. And what I wanted to say about this is really cool because there's lots of other parts to it, like participants of the mapping. So scoring team members, that's where you basically, when you get people in a room and you create an empathy map, you give them some sort of value. Like you might not do it publicly, but you might later say, okay, that CEO on a scale of 1 to 10, his influence and knowledge of what's happening was an 8, and how it fits into this. So that's how I should weigh what he has said. But I think that if you're having trouble getting people to commit to doing things like this, it doesn't have to be all this. Like you don't have to do all this stuff. If you can do this bit, then that's fine. And a lot of times when I do these things, I don't know if all of you use Slack or some sort of like productivity communication tool in your work, but I actually pin things. When people say things in Slack, I pin it and then I add it to an empathy map. Like as soon as they say something that I think is relevant to what we're trying to do, I grab it and then I put it somewhere else. And they see me doing it. And it actually, I think, helps them to understand what I'm doing and how it's going to help us later. What's that? Process flows and wireframes. Does anybody have any comments about empathy maps they wanted to bring up? Here's an example of one that was in progress. So like just with post-it notes and mapping out.
We do have Ginny that loves the pin idea. That's also interesting.
I do love that. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
You know, one thing that I have had to kind of do with on my research is create personas for software development. You know, someone with a different cognitive learning style compared to someone with like a much more technically savvy cognitive learning style. And honestly, the presentation of an empathy map is like, oh yeah, because right now we're using this like paragraph form. And I'm even seeing parts of the empathy map that really resemble like the business model, right? So it's really connected. I love it.
Yeah, and I did this thing where I like grabbed these pictures from Instagram and just stuck them in the middle. These are like people who are our target users and stuck them in the middle. So like, I'm like, okay, you're like, we're thinking like this person. This is our person, right? And then we do the empathy map for that. But you're right, like personas are key to that, because if you start an empathy map exercise by just talking in detail about the people, and it's like acting, you know, it's like you're that guy, you're that girl, you're that person, right? So you're that human. You got to pretend that that's you. And what are you thinking? You know, you're gonna pick up this AR headset and put it on your head. What's happening in your brain? You know. And right. it was interesting too. Like you can see, like someone like, look at this one. Nope. They're like, one guy's like, nope, I'm not putting that on. You know. Yeah. So it's really powerful, I think, way to get people, and it's usually fun. You know, it's a nice way to break up a meeting or a, you know, tedium of getting work done. Like, hey, let's all talk about people. You know. So I think it's quite good. Okay.
Becky, I wonder if I can ask a question real quick.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Oh, you can? Okay, awesome. Excuse me. So thinking about that inclusivity factor and which personas or which pieces of the model we prioritize. And I may have missed it, I came in late, I'm so sorry if I did. How do you prioritize kind of which piece of the human you approach as far as like software design? If that makes sense, like inclusivity factor, learning style, race, gender, identification, family model style.
Well, how I prioritize it, I think that, do you know what? I don't know. I think that I probably prioritize it depending on the product and who the target audience is. So like in our, and also like maybe where you want it to go, because like in the one I was just showing, primarily the users are men, but you don't want to exclude women, right? Because there are women involved. And, but I mean, I think that's probably the best way to prioritize it. And you know what, this is an interesting question, because I think, as we all know, especially in the Portland area and the West Coast, diversity and inclusion is like a big thing. You know, it's important to us. And I think rightly so. But I think it's hard when you are designing products, because a lot of product design is about prioritization and choosing what's more important. And you have to sometimes do that based on like that situation. The men clearly outweigh the women, right? So to sell the product, you have to target it more at men, right? In order to, like the feature set, you know, you have to make sure that works for men. Like, so if 80% of the people out there using it are men, then you have to make sure that your features are working for them as well as women. But if you only targeted women, you would be limiting your audience. So that's a really interesting thought.
It's been a struggle. We've been focusing mostly on cognitive learning style, and that's such a small piece of the whole human picture that I was actually super thrilled to hear you say, like, it's really dependent on product, and that's very interesting. Yeah, it's a struggle to determine the priority of all those things, really.
And my mouse isn't working now, so yeah, it is definitely a struggle. Well, product design is a struggle. Let's see. My mouse is not letting me click on things. This is an example. So there's a thing called wireframes and process flows. And people, I think that, in my personal opinion, process flows are high level like this. So this is a process flow that was defined for a UX intake process. So what happens, like how the like, let's say somebody said, oh, you know what, the voice recognition isn't working very well. Okay, that comes in and it gets documented in a specific place, right? And then it gets moved to a specific product. It gets logged somewhere. It gets flagged. It gets reviewed, and then it gets put into the roadmap, right? So that's what this was. This is a documentation of wireframe of how it's also a process flow of how interface works, right? So this is the camera interface for the AR headset, and it gets clearly like more detailed of information of how things work, what's happening, you know. These are voice commands. So like if the person says this, it goes to the next screen, etc., etc. I'm sure many of you have seen this kind of stuff. And then I'm going to show you. Sorry.
Oh, is this, you might be going into it right now. Is this your tool that you use? I've never heard of it before.
What?
It starts with an A, X, or
Axure. Oh yeah.
Axure.
Yeah.
You don't have to pull that up if you're going to, but I thought it was kind of interesting.
I am going to. I still use a variety of tools. Those ones that I just showed, I did in Illustrator.
Oh, okay.
But and the reason I did them in Illustrator and not something like InVision or whatever is because InVision wasn't built to design for AR, right? Like you can't prototype AR in InVision, right? So yeah. it just didn't work.
Adobe XD has some interesting options for designing for voice. I saw that they had a keynote about that. They you can set up the app to read to you, like the text reader. I thought that was kind of cool.
You can use voice commands too.
Voice command.
Yeah. A friend of mine, he had a company called SaySpring that was a voice UI design prototyping company, and he got bought by Adobe, and then they integrated his technology into XD. That's
so cool. You know the guy.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy. He works for Adobe now. So this is affinity diagrams are like, this is what I call my affinity diagram. So basically, when I start working with trying to figure stuff out, I set up a capture section, and where I just like, this is where I get stuff from Slack or wherever, like things people say to me in an interview, things they say in Slack that I pin, research that I do online, anything. I just start putting words in, and then and concepts, and then I start moving it into places of where I think it needs to go. So like, then I start building out the audiences, and then I start building out other, comparable things, like people who are doing something similar. And then I start building out like processes and diagrammatical information of how things work, and anything really, like, and this is elements of value pyramid. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's expansion of the core values, but it's basically like all the motivations of human beings, like why we do the things we do and what are most important to us. And like Apple supposedly has their product brand is the more of these things you can register, the more powerful your your impact of your product is. And they have something like 11 or 13 of them or something like that. So that's what I do, how I document. And then these are like diagrams of how internal tools work that we have and what those mean. And it just helps give me like a big picture. And then these are like influences, like ideas of things I like that I think are relational to what we're working on or what we want to communicate or what we're doing. And then I'm going to go back to this for a little bit. So these are 3, I like to, whenever I give a talk, is talk about like things you can put into your brain. So this is a podcast. It's called The Knowledge Project, and it's really, really good. And right now, and I think in general, they focus on mental models and talking about how mental models are implemented and impact society. So it offers a lot of, they have a newsletter that comes out once a week, but the podcast and the blog are amazing. And I learned tons of stuff from it. I think it's, anybody who's into like human behavior or system thinking is definitely a good one. This lady, I was introduced by somebody at Amazon. I think she teaches at Stanford, but she's written tons of articles online about system design and user experience design and different things like that. And then this podcast, Humans 2.0, is one that I also listen to, and it's by this guy. He's like 22 years old, and he basically started doing this podcast as an exercise to help him overcome being introverted. And he interviews all kinds of interesting people, neuroscientists, all kinds of people like that are doing fascinating things in the world, like psychologists, all kinds of people. It's really good. So, and this is just my information. So if you have any questions about anything I talk about or any concerns about anything I talked about, or you just like want to share some happiness, or you want to brainstorm ideas about the future or something that you're working on, I think I'm pretty good at that. So I can help there usually. So this is my contact email at my different companies. And then I've recently been working with this organization that kind of just came about a week and a half ago called COVID Response Collective. And I wanted to I wanted to share it with you because they're serving the Pacific Northwest. So I apologize if you're not in the Pacific Northwest, but they have a Discord server, which I'll show you right here. And there's loads of things happening on it. Like people talk about all kinds of things. There's like people helping each other with deliveries, distribution of thermometers. I mean, I actually think this guy is doing system design on a massive level and very, very fast. This guy and girl, the 2 founders, I shouldn't have said that. But, and all the people involved, I think there's like over 300 people or something now involved, but, and it literally got set up within 24 hours and people started helping people instantaneously. It was crazy to see it happen. So and they have lots of things too about like, if you don't feel good, like people talk about how they're feeling and, they have like help all organized by county. So I highly recommend that. And there also is a Facebook group or Facebook page and a Facebook group. So if you're needing help, that's somewhere that you can get it.
That's one that Marisol here, I don't know if she's still online with us, but she posted earlier, sorry, I'm assuming pronouns there. They posted earlier about needing some resources for getting groceries without coming into contact with others. And something that I've noticed is very helpful there was Facebook groups. I'm not super on Facebook, but I stay tuned into my one local Facebook group. And I've seen some people posting there, especially elderly folks. They have posted requesting help with groceries and such. And a lot of people have actually come together. It's pretty cool to see see that system functioning almost in a more healthy way. Just I know it's been talked about, but like in calamities, how humans come together.
Yeah, it's so
also
powerful to see. Yeah. Do you know I apologize if we go much longer, my headphones are gonna die, so I might have to dial in on my they don't, I have to switch devices. But I'm just telling you that in case it happens. But
Okay.
I think that is so powerful. Like there's a quote from Mr. Rogers, I think. He said that when he was a kid, and he would get scared, his mom would say, well, look for the helpers. And I mean, what's so great about this organization is like it was instantaneous, you know, and literally people were like people would join and people were like, oh, well, what's this, you know, what are we working on, what's up? And they're like, I don't know, we just set it up like 2 hours ago, right? And like, and then within like 24 hours it was like, now we have it all organized by county. Okay, now we have groups set up to do the following. And then it was like, now we're building hand washing stations. And it was just like, holy crap, you know, it just
Cool.
like, yeah, it was brilliant. It's brilliant.
Kind of related to design too. I've talked about this with my team, is like, I don't know if that's just my working style, but I really like to, like what you're talking about, just do the divergent thinking where you put everything on the table and then you can converge and kind of identify what's more important than relative to other pieces of the system that are now mapped down. It's kind of interesting in the same way what happened with your group here, that once everyone was there, they were able to identify the need, say by county, and then organize that way.
Yeah, it was really cool.
OCD.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to watch. And then now they're working on getting like nonprofit status to set up an ongoing organization that's just about community response, you know, and organizing to help as when things like this happen. So that's really cool.
Totally.
That's all I have, I think. So I'm not sure if we want to talk about if there's other questions or.
Yeah, I think we've had some pretty good discussions so far. Anyone else have anything that they're thinking about?
Hey, Becky, it's Erin again.
Becky, I wonder if you.
Oh, go right ahead.
No, go ahead, Erin. You got it. Go ahead, Erin.
Okay. So we work with developers on a daily basis, you know, defining the needs of the users, helping flesh those out, gather requirements, and then translate those into, you know, items for development. You know, a high-level description, user stories, and then acceptance criteria, you know, statements of fact that are made true when development is done. So that being our shared definition of done. Quite frequently, our UX UI designer will have to reach back, and do a double touch on things that developers have implemented because they're not, you know, following the standard that he has defined. How do you draw attention? I guess let me rephrase that. What asset or assets do you have that act as supporting artifacts for standards that you have designed for a user interface? And then how do you draw attention to that for developers so they continuously reference that in their general workflow?
That's a really good question. So I think it varies based on who they are. And okay, so one question I would have in that situation is there support from above to meet those standards? Because if
I think so.
Okay, well then, because that generally can be a problem if there isn't.
Okay, yeah.
Because then the designer is fighting two battles. But I think that maybe there might be some level of education of working with engineers to help them understand why you want to do it. It's kind of like, I think sometimes engineers, and I mean, I know how to code a bit, not a lot. I would be helpful in most situations, but I think when you look at design in the same way that you look at like the quality of your code has to be set up in a certain way. I think that there might be some level of education there that might help. But generally what And I think documenting, if you can document, and if you can analyze the way the developers work. Unfortunately for designers, a lot of the time the onus is put on a designer to fit in around how the team works. So it's very difficult if you're not in an organization that is like primarily design led to, you know, kind of dictate how things should go. You kind of have to just, it's like an evolving learning process. So, I mean, if you wanted to talk further about it, like if you wanted me to talk with your designer or help them maybe talk about what's happening and see if there's ways that they could help, I might be able to do that. But it's kind of hard to, like, most of the ways I have figured out how to do that have been based on the situation. So like where are things, and then let's figure out how. It's like basically you have to look at the UX design of whatever you're designing for your outgoing product. You have to look at the internal UX and figure out, like, look at the stakeholders. They're the engineers. What are they doing? Why are they doing that? You know, and how can I help them to achieve X goal by maybe adjusting how I work a little bit, or by setting up another process. But it sounds like if you have to continually go back and say, let's check on this, eventually, you know, whenever people do that, like, it's kind of like teaching anything, you know, if you like say, okay, well, you go do it and try it, and then we'll go back and look at it and see how it turned out, that eventually you would get to a place where you would avoid the second process. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's something that we constantly revisit in our retrospectives. So, I mean, that would be fantastic if he could reach out to you. I really appreciate that resource offer. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Totally.
Retrospectives too. It's definitely something that's like
Yeah.
always on the plate on our team. Like, oh, we should definitely do that. And we kind of share some comments back and forth. Like, oh, I don't, you know, I guess I'm not at liberty to totally discuss our
I
whole.
I hear you.
Yeah, it's just like we share comments, and then we're like, yeah, that's definitely a good learning moment for everyone. I'm getting kind of dark here, but that's great that you make the space to have some learnings.
Yeah.
In processes.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, I'm also curious, Trisha, if you, Trisha is a fantastic designer, developer. She's lucky to be skilled in both all at once, which is pretty tough for me, at least as a designer or developer. So how have you addressed design systems in your work?
I think it's a really interesting question. You know, coming from a design background, I have familiarity with the tools, and there are definitely some that are easier as a developer. So if I'm just handed a sketch file, you know, sometimes that's hard to hunt around inside of it and click things to get margins and things like that. But there's a tool called Zeppelin where you can very easily click on something and see the margins or the space between elements. And we've been recently using Figma a lot, and Figma has a nice feature where you can click on one element and then hover over another, and it gives you the spacing between elements. So I think maybe just doing an inventory of your tools and talking to your developers and seeing what is an easy tool for them to use. And might not always be the same tool that you're using to design.
That's a great idea. That's a really good, yeah. So like that's in effect designing the UX for the engineer, like trying to understand what's happening that's preventing them from feeling like they have the tools. Maybe that's how they feel. They don't have the tools. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes there's also a little fear from a developer standpoint of messing up the design. So if I'm handed a sketch file or Figma, sometimes I'm scared to click around and do the things I need to do because I don't want to mess up a designer's work. So I think talking with your team maybe about that and seeing what makes the developer feel comfortable digging in there and getting the details that they need.
That's awesome. I want you on my team.
Thank you. That's really good feedback.
What is your image there, Erin?
I think it's a potato. I'm not.
Dude,
are we talking to a potato?
Oh my God. Yeah, I must have clicked the video button and
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think I might want to be a potato on my next conference call.
Dude, I'll send you it's Snap Camera. It's a Snapchat extension. I'll send you the link.
Cool, perfect.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, that'd
There
be
was,
brilliant.
You brought up Discord, Becky. My family and I have been playing Dungeons and Dragons of all things.
Perfect. On Discord.
We've been meeting on Discord for it. There's other platforms, but like Discord's free, obviously. So when my brother-in-law just brought up, I don't know what it's called off the top of my head, but it's an app that changes your voice. So you can be like a robot or a female if you're male, and vice versa, and all over the place. You can have like helium kind of voice, like all sorts of things. It's kind of fun. Maybe something we could try.
That's awesome. Do you know what's so crazy is that this incidence of us being isolated has like forced so many people to become more into technology, you know? And some interesting things are happening. Like I saw Google has AR models of animals and stuff. And I was thinking, I was playing with them the other day, like I had a penguin sitting on my keyboard. And it was like, you know, as a kid, learning about penguins, you know, you're at school, they're talking about penguins, and you can like pop a penguin on your like on your desk and just kind of like look at it and interact with it. I was like, wow, that is crazy, you know, to think that's, I mean, and it's now teachers are leveraging that kind of stuff because of where we're at.
My friend, she's getting her graduate degree at Johns Hopkins for educational technology, and she's just started a Twitter to start connecting with a bunch of people. And she's actually getting a lot of resources like that she can use. She's going to teach elementary specifically, I think. It's interesting to think about, especially like you brought up AR, of like, I really loved like Egypt in 6th grade, and I just thinking of how that would look like to visit Egypt and like kind of walk through a tomb, just something like that. That'll be really cool. And like even this kind of like you said, accelerating the pace of technology and seeing what this looks like. This could have happened 20 years from now, but because of what's happening, we're all kind of forced to try these new things all at once and be nervous together and be potatoes together.
Yeah, we're all made potatoes together, totally. Yeah, we're potato prototypes. Well, cool. Is there anybody else want to?
I think Jenny had a.
Yeah. I did have a quick question for you guys. And actually, Trisha, I'm also excited to maybe hear, and I'm sure there's a ton of professionals. So, hi, I'm really, really new to the UI UX world. In fact, my background's disasters and diseases, but I'm jumping into computer science and UX because we're building technology for emergency management. And we're coming to use a system called GenderMag. And I wonder if you guys have ever heard of it before. It was built out of OSU, and it's basically just identifying and helping UX designers build toward different cognitive learning styles based on gender. So we adopt personas, we do a roundtable based on just one user story or 2 user stories. And we go through all of the elements. And I just kind of wondered, have you guys heard of this system or anything similar to this kind of like roundtable feedback?
I haven't. That sounds really interesting though. Or the tool, I haven't heard of this specific tool you mentioned.
So it was started by Dr. Margaret Burnett, and she is a big advocate for inclusive UI UX design. And she teaches human-computer interaction. And also, I apologize for the sounds. My puppy's right under me. My team and I are trying to kind of incorporate this in our Scrum, in our Agile method, where it's, honestly, from the beginning, we build mock-ups, we do prototype tests or those feedback loop tests, and then we hand them off to the developers to develop the backend and front end from there. So it's kind of like from the beginning, we're trying to, incorporate that inclusive design and that feedback loop. And I haven't seen a lot of like research or talk about it. So that's why I was like, oh, hey, maybe you guys know.
Yeah, I haven't heard about that tool, but I just looked it up and it sounds interesting.
What was it called again?
It's called GenderMag, M-A-G at the end. And from what I understand, it's fairly new. And I'm also like I just last past year learned about Cat Holmes and like really got into this and starting to learn who the big names are. So like I'm gonna be, you know, looking up a lot of other names that I got from here. But yeah, I really do appreciate you guys' like that idea of like the process of how we're bringing that design feedback loop into our like everyday development kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, totally.
Very cool.
Yeah, thanks for
Anyone
talking about
else?
this. This is really cool. The other question I wanted to ask you, Becky, is that template that you were showing that goes through kind of like all the snippets and things that you're grabbing. Not your empathy, maybe it is your empathy map. But do you have a template that you tend to like use, or just, you know, let your team use, things like that, that like it makes you kind of go through all the checkpoints?
I don't have a template. I generally just have, the only template that I have is that I start with a capture area and I just put everything in there, anything that seems at all relevant at anywhere of people say or do or whatever. And then I just start organizing from there. And I did do most of it in Axure, but recently I started switching to using Mural so other people could participate if they want to. But I do kind of, now I do them both simultaneously because I kind of do like to have things organized the way I want in some areas. So I kind of go between both of them, but no, I don't, I'm afraid I don't really have a template. Sorry.
That's okay. I just didn't know if like, you know, working with your teams and like identifying different personas or different human needs, if there was like, you know, like, all right, guys, everybody follow the template. But it honestly, it sounds more just like, you know, like getting to know a regular person, right? There's no template. It's just
Yeah, you know
getting to
what
know
I
people.
think that in UX design, just in general, my feeling about it is we spend so much time debating how it's done, right? It's like, and I actually wrote an article on Medium about this, about the product design or the implementing the design system at RealWare, because it's felt like we spent, if equally amount, if not more, debating how to do it than doing it, you know, because people couldn't agree on what tool we should use, or, you know, what this label means or whatever. And I feel like if we can give each other some freedom to not, you know, feel like it has to be this way, which I mean, personally, I've done that just in my own personal growth. I've done that and I feel a lot better, you know, because I used to feel really frustrated in my work because I'd be like, that's not how you do it. You know, that's not what that is, or that's not how it's called, what it should be called. And I thought, I was actually talking to my boss about this today, and I was like, you know, that whole making space thing just totally opened up things for me, you know, and made me think, well, you know, I mean, let's see how it evolves, you know, let's see what happens. And I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with me. I'm sure there's many who would, but that's just my personal feeling about it.
I think oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, you go.
Out of templates, you know, or just that idea that like we try to really simplify a process that is so human intuitive, and to where we end up standardizing people. So I totally agree with your assessment. Like it's hard to place a template, and it's hard to like get everyone to follow that because interactions are different and people are unique. So
yeah,
no,
and actually Patricia just posted something in the chat that's beautiful. It says, I like to think that my team has a toolbox instead of a template, and we put out different tools or different problems to solve.
Yeah.
And the team itself is a toolbox, right? Like when you're trying to accomplish something, that's what I meant by like the system, the internal system, right? Like what tools have I got to work with? Well, I've got like this sales and marketing person who works this way, wants everything yesterday, and decides like, you know, this is what we need to do. And then I've got, you know, this scientist over here who's working this way and decides that, you know, no, this is how it's supposed to work, and likes to get his information in this format. So a lot of my time is spent like that, like analyzing those tools, I guess, like what do we got here and how we, and at the beginning when I first started working with aventurine, you know, some people were looking at what I was doing and like, are you nuts? Like, what is that? You know? And now they're like, oh, can we do one of those brainstorming sessions, you know? And I'm like, yeah, totally, it'd be awesome, you know? So I think that it's just humans.
I think on a related note, it helped me to like get out of kind of my perfectionist mindset a little bit of like, in a lot of different ways, but kind of closer to this note, it's like I have an idea of what it should look like, right? My mental map, and just because it didn't work out because of technical restraints or this or that, it doesn't mean it's not, you know, perfectly functional for the client or this thing that we're creating together. Yes, results in conversation over standard process. Love that. Yeah. And then I think we also touched on being subscriptive versus prescriptive. Is that what it is? Like not prescribing to the solution, but just subscribing to the goal of like the overall goal that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and a big one that
I like that.
The guy who was a CEO of RealWare at the time when I worked there was a systems engineer himself. Like he actually told me, you're not doing UX design, you're doing systems engineering. And I was like, oh, okay. So, but one of his things, like from one of his leadership books, is that the phrase great is the enemy of good, you know? So you have to like kind of, and also like get wins where you can, right? Like a lot of times in my analysis of working with a team or trying to get a team to go to a goal of integrating design, I'm like sacrificing the actual design of the product to get buy-in from the person, right? To like, oh, this person trusts me more now because I let it do it this way, even though I think it's the wrong way. But next time I'm going to go, hey, how about we try it this way? And they're going to go, okay, you know, yeah, let's try it that way. So you're designing systems all the time, constantly.
That unrolls so much. You start looking at the world totally differently.
I know, and it's a good way because it allows you to detach a little bit, you know, and not feel like, it allows me to not feel so emotional when something doesn't, you know, like emotionally invested. Like I can look at things more it's like science, you know, it's like you're looking at things more scientifically, and it allows you to kind of separate yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and when I kind of started like thinking about kind of like what you're saying about like creating your environment, which affects your internal environment, you know, physical versus internal environments, and then seeing how that affects your output. There's also the topic of atomic habits. James Clear, he talks about how important it is to pay attention to what's out here and how that really shifts your mindset. And then how also related to the pushing the pull door, making it easier for yourself to pull the push door, like not kind of putting blame on this other person, like your future self, you know, for being bad or good or whatever. It's just creating space for yourself to be successful in different ways by crafting your environment.
Yeah. Just, I think thinking of yourself as a system.
Oh yeah.
Like I do that, like all kinds of ways you're being affected constantly.
All right. So anyone else have any last comments? This was a great discussion, by the way.
Yeah, this was cool. I really enjoyed it. I'm really glad everyone was able to attend and participate. I think it was really, really cool. Go out and design a great system.
Yeah. Call to arms. So, yeah, my people. I'm going to quote you on Twitter, Posey.
Yeah, y'all, we need it. Like the inclusive design and inclusive tech, like I really believe that that market, that an idea that we're going to have a system or a set methodology in place that's like, okay, if you go through these steps, you can call yourself an inclusively designed technology, you know, and it answers those needs. And people will choose, you know, inclusively designed things over none. But what do you guys think about that? I know we're just wrapping up. I'm sorry, and that's a huge question, but y'all guys think that there's a market out there for inclusively designed technology?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Especially
I think so.
in this area. Yeah.
Well, I think I mean, one of the things I love, like, do you know what's interesting? Like I'm, you know, quite out like older in my career, late in my career, I guess you would say, but I love millennials. Like there's so many people that think that it's, oh my gosh, terrible, you know, blah blah blah. And the generations coming after me, because I think, look at what they're doing. You know, like I actually, it gives me hope, you know, that things like inclusivity and talking about mental health and feelings and how everything's connected and caring about the earth, like nobody before them really did that, you know, and didn't grow up with it, you know, and using technology to benefit those things. I'm like, yeah, this is great. I think it's brilliant.
It takes a lot of work. I mean, that's what I'm coming to find in all of this, is that every little piece of inclusivity, every aspect of a human needs its own feedback loop. It needs its own, like, literally its own expert in designing for, really. And that's so much to ask for any one development team, because that's like, you need your own like person team on top of that, on top of your UX. And
Those
it's
podcasts, you would love those podcasts, or anybody who's interested. Those are really,
the Humans 2.0, right?
yeah, and the Knowledge Project, really good.
I'm definitely checking them out.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting thing, because that's something that you can have a lot of influence on just by yourself in an organization, even if you're a junior member of a team. Like, if you have a passion for inclusive design and accessibility, all you have to do is learn about it, and then you can start being a leader on your team.
Yeah, champion for it. Yeah. Yep. And actually, you know, what's great about how society is shifting is that being inclusive is bringing more openness to inclusive thinking, right? Like adding that person to your team that thinks inclusively is actually part of the inclusive movement, you know? So that, and people are starting to actually recognize that as important. That's great.
Definitely to keep talking about it, it is important. And then finding tools that make it even easier. It all comes back to the system design. I love it so much. But like making it easier for people to try something. My boss has said that he likes to follow the path of least resistance, which allows you to move quickly. But he said that as a way for me to call him out if he was going too quickly.
Oh, right.
Right, which I loved. I was like, thank you for saying that. Now I can call you out.
Yeah.
But it also opened the door for me to make it easier for him if I wanted him to try something new.
Yeah.
I had to do some advanced work and provide something like a tool or a process, or like the bullet points of something. For example, I just shared in the chat here, it's something called Pally. It's ally with the ones, but it's PAL, like the combination of those words. So it automates your accessibility testing through the command line. I brought it up on my team, and it just kind of hasn't broken through the ice yet, I guess. But definitely my teammates were willing to have the conversation. They loved that it was automated. And I think if I kind of stay on top of it, that's what's important. And what I've fallen short on, at least with my team, is that I haven't followed up on it. But I think that's when people listen, is when you are really passionate about it and you kind of are persistent. And if you work on a good team, then usually people are willing to listen and care about what you care about. So
yeah, that's
Caitlin,
cool.
I'm kind of curious if I could ask real quick, what kind of incentive do you wish came from the higher up, that, like, for maybe those that weren't attaching to the idea of inclusive design? Like, if you had all the support you ever wanted from your higher ups in this, what would that look like?
Who was that question to? Sorry, I missed that.
And anyone really, anyone really, like, what, inclusive design, it's an additional, it's additional, right? It's not along the normal flow of things. So if you had the support that you think was necessary from your, your higher up to implement this, like this inclusive design, or these techniques, sorry, what would that look like? Like, yeah, I'm curious, like how would you feel your team could be better incentivized or even just encouraged in this?
I think a lot of that comes down to the requirements that you're given, and a lot of that comes from the client. And the good thing is that can be based in financials now. People are getting sued for not having tools that are inclusive or accessible. So that's one way, is getting the support through clients and through management, that is going to be a requirement for a project. I mean, I think a lot of it also is just cultivating that as a team. Like we have an accessibility Slack channel and our partners post in there quite often. So it's just kind of visible and known that is a value that we have as a company and something that we always want to move forward with.
That's cool.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Becky?
Well, I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that I think a lot of the companies that I work with, fortunately and unfortunately, are quite small at the point I'm working with them. So that's kind of like an idea that you can seed in and try to get people to start thinking about it at the beginning. But I also think that a lot of organizations look at that as, do we have the resources to do that? Do you know what I mean? And that you have to figure out a good way to help integrate it. Like the tool actually Ginny shared was quite interesting, and the tool you shared was very good, Kaylin. But a lot of my work recently, it's just really interesting. And I've worked on a lot of products that are specifically for things. So like an AR headset, when you think about that, that's voice control. Okay, so it's AR and it's voice control. There's a lot of people that can't use that, right? But it's like, okay, well, are there a lot of people that can't use that are actually in that job or that need it? Because if there are, then there should be some way to, like, how does that mitigated, But a lot of times startups, I think a lot of startups, that's considered the inclusivity factor is considered an extra concern that might not get addressed at the beginning, but hopefully that's changing, because it will become more of a, you have to think about that from the beginning.
And I do think it is something to think about, kind of what Posey's saying. She wishes it would be enough to just say it's the right thing to do and do it. And then also to have it be part of like a value add conversation, especially like with startups when they're trying to prioritize and get like buy-in on you don't want to do like feature driven development, but getting buy-in on having different aspects of your platform that are accessible for everyone. There are some tools that allow people to adopt their own workflows that were originally made for accessibility reasons, like a speak aloud feature that like reads something back to you, or that reads your text for you. Like that might just be, as you're working, you might have it read back to you, and you're an abled person, but that's just a useful feature to have. So maybe that's not the best example, but
I wonder what's happening right now. Like what's the shift in society that everybody's moved to remote working? I wonder if that has helped or hurt, and in what areas. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if there's a lot more challenges coming up where people are noticing it's an issue, or if it's becoming, I wonder, it would be interesting to find out like what's happening now and how it's affecting that perception and experience for different types of people, I mean, definitely, like if you're Wi-Fi challenged, that's a problem. Yeah. I was so worried that my Wi-Fi was gonna not be good.
It's great.
Just so you guys know, I live on a farm in the Dalles, a lavender farm, like quite remote. And I was remote before we were remote, but Yeah, once
Sounds
in a
amazing, by the way. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's quite cool. My walks are very pleasant. But I was so worried that the Wi-Fi would not be great. So we pre-recorded this talk in case it like dropped out while we were talking, but it's been great. Like it's done really well. So that's good.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I did see that I have Comcast Xfinity service, and they're giving free Wi-Fi at certain hotspots. I don't know how close to them that you have to be though, so it might still require going outside. And if you don't have like a mobile device, it might not help. But that's one option helping with the internet access thing.
Yeah. My problem is I have bad mobile reception as well. So I literally, if I want to make a phone call, like a real regular phone call, I have to drive down the road. So
I guess
hey, nobody can call me. So I was
in Southern Oregon, and I know that reality like quite well, having to like drive down to the end of the lane or walk down to the end of the lane to get cell
you're like amongst the lavender, you're out. Okay.
It's a nice background at least.
Yeah, and it smells nice. It's relaxing, so that's good. Yeah.
Okay, it's 7:30, y'all, and we ended up with a core group of us, so happy to see that everyone hung in there to the end. Yes, thank you everyone. Posies and some other people are posting some thank yous in the chat. Big thank you. There was a lot of knowledge sharing that just happened.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It was a lot to handle. So I'll ask
You
Becky.
tested your system.
Yes, and the system worked pretty well,
Mm-hmm.
I should say. So thank you for figuring this out with us, everyone. I'll ask Becky to send me any resources, like links to things, interesting things, so we can send it out over the meetup link. And then, yeah, maybe we'll do a series of some sort, some just conversation.
That sounds really fun. Yeah.
Fireside chats.
Yeah. Let us know if you start that tea. I can't remember what you called it. Your tea.
Women in tech drinking tea.
Yeah.
We could do that. We could do that as a spin-off of Women Who Code. We could do Women in Tech Drinking Tea, and it would just be like tech chat conversations. I'm happy to set that up. That would be fun. Yeah.
So down for that. So down for that.
I have lots of
like copy all the links real fast.
Yeah. We could maybe we could do figure out a way to communicate to get topics, ideas, or something like this week. Let's talk about this or whatever. That'd be great.
Yeah, people can do their homework.
Awesome.
Yeah, and somebody can do an animated intro, so we have like a nice little.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay, well we'll figure out how to do that. I'll work with Kaylin. We'll figure out how to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so excited. How do I? Okay, hold on. I have to figure out where my share thing is. For some reason, when I'm sharing my whole full screen, the Zoom bar goes transparent. There it is. Okay. So thank you everyone. I hope you have a good night and staying healthy. All those cliches that are important still to say.
Yeah, stay safe.
Thank you, Becky, for your time. Stay safe. And for 52 Limited, I know you're kind of faux hosting. Usually we're hosted at 52 in person, but she still joined us.
It was still a really great discussion. It was really great to join, and it's just nice to feel like part of a group of people right now.
Yeah, totally.
It's been awfully lonely, so I just really like to see all the faces. And like,
there's humans out there.
You're here, Amanda. You are here. You are seen.
Yes, awesome.
We're really excited for the day when we get to be back in your space and having your events there.
Yeah.
Me too. Oh my God.
That'll be great.
And, can we share your info with folks who are looking for jobs right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I sent that over to Kaylin a bit earlier. But yeah, it's a weird time. I don't have a lot to share in terms of jobs, but I think proactive conversations are helpful for whoever wants to have them. Yeah, I think some people just need to talk to. I love talking to people, so I'm down with that.
Yeah, I think that Women in Tech Drinking Tea would help. Like just have conversations. Yeah. Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
That'd be so fun.
I will work
I was
with
definitely
you.
drinking tequila this entire time, but
Hey, it could be, you know, you can have whatever kind of tea you want.
solids. Thank you. It's very inclusive of you.
Yes. Totally flexible. All right, everybody. I'll see you. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you guys. Be well.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
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 Trying to figure out if I can save the chat. I'm gonna hang out here for a second.
Do you need anything else from me?
No, I do.
Okay.
Oops, I muted myself. Sorry.
No.
I
Well, have a great night, Kaylin. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of this. It was a really, really great talk.
Yeah, that went really well. I'm glad that. Sorry, I forgot I turned my video off. Becky has a very like, I don't know how to describe it. It feels very personable when she's talking to you. It feels like you're like best buddies and you're just like chilling.
She's very relaxed. It's really nice. It was a really good presentation. I'm not a UX designer, but I understood about 75% of it, so that's good. I think that's good. I knew Acture and InDesign, so I'm feeling proud.
It must be. I
haven't used them. I've recruited for people with those tools before.
Cool. I wonder if it's like for larger scale projects than I've worked on before, and I revealed that I work at a small business. You know, but it's cool to like share a bunch of resources like that in these channels. So
it's fascinating. Well, great job. I'm glad everything went well, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, thank you so much, and have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Oh, it's in my face. How do I stop recording?